What's up, guys? I am Constant, and today we are going to be talking about the top performing tanks in Castle Nathria and Mythic Plus. If you enjoy this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and check me out on Twitch. This is a nice overview of the strengths and weaknesses of each tank, as well as what utility they offer. For broad strokes, Protection Paladin has high DPS and high utility. Brewmaster has high mitigation, Mystic Touch, and high mobility. Vengeance have solid AoE DPS and damage reduction, Chaos Brand, and high mobility. Guardian has high health and can have the best defensives as well as the potential for high DPS. Blood DK has very strong self-healing, anti-magic shell, and anti-magic zone, as well as grips. And Prot Warrior has some solid defensives as well as high mobility. Shadowlands tank balance is pretty incredible at the moment, with the only real exception being Prot Warrior, though it's worth pointing out that any of these tanks can be viable in any scenario if the player is good enough. That might sound like an overly general statement, but it's not common for every tank to be viable, and that really is the case right now. Alright, so at the moment it is difficult to give an accurate ranking of the top 4 tanks. Brewmaster, Vengeance, Blood, and Protection Paladin all have certain strengths for different fights that can really be seen by the preference of Brewmaster and Vengeance on Shriekwing and Huntsman. Both of these fights will obviously benefit from a high mobility tank, especially Huntsman. And that puts these two specs at the top of the list for the first 2 encounters in Mythic Castle Nathria. All 4 of these top tanks are very solid in raid right now, though I think pretty much everyone feels strange putting 4 of the 6 tanks in the S tier. And there isn't really a tank right now that's not viable. Obviously, Prot Warrior is the least popular of all of the options, but every single tank can work, whether it be raid or Mythic Plus. While cutting-edge guilds are much more likely to be swapping out tanks depending on what each particular fight calls for, any guild focusing on normal or heroic shouldn't see issues with any of these tanks. Guardian Druid is still a very solid tank, and Protection Warrior is still completely viable, though Warrior is obviously a bit more rare these days. Tank balance overall in Shadowlands is looking great, and the general consensus here is that the vast majority of players will be just fine with any tank, assuming there is some skill there. So in the top 100 keys, the most popular tanks are Vengeance Demon Hunter and Brewmaster Monk. Protection Paladins are present as well. There are 2 runs that have the same Prot Warrior, 1 run with a Blood DK, and the highest run on the Raider IO leaderboards with a Guardian Druid is ranked in the top 120, so that's not too far behind. This doesn't mean all that much for the average player running keys, but it is always worth looking at the group composition that the best players in the world choose when they're pushing keys, especially at the start of the first season in a new expansion. Vengeance is the king of keys right now, but like I've said before, every tank has a place. Now, Vengeance has high AoE DPS potential, very high mobility, and they have pretty decent survivability as well. Brewmaster and Protection Paladin are both very strong. They both serve as excellent options. Brewmaster helps slow things down for the healer with Stagger, and that's something that cannot be underestimated in the first season of a new expansion. They're also very mobile, and Protection Paladin has great DPS output, strong survivability, and their utility is pretty incredible. Blood DK has excellent self-healing, and their AMS and AMZ are very useful in certain scenarios. Grips are always good to have, especially with affixes like Sanguine, which is coming up in just a couple weeks. But it can take Blood a while to ramp up their survivability, and their health can be very spiky. From a healer perspective, it can be a little stressful to heal Blood DKs in some of the higher keys. Guardian Druid is another solid option, depending on a few different factors. Guardian can have the best survivability, it can also have really good DPS, but it can't really have both. They typically land somewhere in between those, or they're a really, really solid tank that doesn't do much damage, or they're keeping up with DPS, but they're a little squishy. Guardian Druid does have strong utility, and I have to admit that it felt really weird putting both Blood and Guardian in the B tier here, but at the end of the day, they're not as strong as Brewmaster or Prot Paladin, and they're generally a better option than Warrior. Protection Warriors are still completely viable options for keys. They don't really perform on the same level as the other tanks, but they do have really good mobility. That's their strongest feature at the moment, and they have decent survivability. The issue with their survivability is that it's somewhat inconsistent. It can put groups in less than favorable situations sometimes, especially if you're running a healer like a Holy Paladin that's more cooldown dependent. They don't do enough DPS, and outside of spell reflection, they aren't great with magic damage. Plain and simple, Warriors need to get some love from Blizzard. I would be very surprised if this did not happen in the next couple weeks for Prot Warrior, We just saw a little bit of love go Fury and Arms direction, but it wasn't really enough in PvE. But we'll see how they handle balance for Warriors moving forward. I'm hopeful. Now, before people take to the comments and get angry because the spec that you play for tank isn't at the very top, remember that player skill is not accounted for here. So an exceptional warrior tank is going to outperform a mediocre guardian druid every time. Top tier blood DKs are going to outperform run-of-the-mill brewmasters. Tier lists are based on perfect conditions, and those conditions don't really exist in the real world. Every single tank spec is at least viable for raid content and Mythic Plus right now. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and check me out on Twitch. And as always, thanks for watching.